The stars do not care.
This is the first truth every spacefaring species must learn, usually through loss, sometimes through extinction. The universe is ancient beyond reckoning, cold beyond imagining, and vast beyond any meaning a mortal mind might impose upon it. Stars are born in violence, live in fire, and die in silence that stretches for millions of years before the next flicker of light appears. They do not remember the civilizations that rose beneath their warmth. They do not mourn the worlds that burned.
Kethris Vorn had lived for 917 standard cycles. In that time, she had watched 3 stars die. She had witnessed the fall of the Margoth Confederacy, the dissolution of the Eternal Compact, and the quiet fade of the Sistran Choir into myth and memory. She had served the Sethrani hegemony through 4 expansion epochs, 2 internal schisms, and the long peace that had followed the subjugation of the Outer Rim. She had believed, as all Sethrani believed, that her people were eternal. She had been wrong. The observation deck of the refugee vessel Morning Wind offered a view that Kethris had once found beautiful. Now it felt like looking into a grave. Behind them, visible only as a faint smear of disrupted starlight, lay the Cradle Worlds, 12 planets that had nurtured Sethrani civilization for 40,000 years. Ahead lay nothing she recognized: unknown space, uncharted regions. The domain of species the hegemony had never bothered to catalog because they had been deemed too primitive, too young, too irrelevant. The door behind her whispered open. Archon Vorn. She did not turn. Report, Sentinel.
Fyron moved to stand beside her, his reflection a ghost in the viewport glass. He was young, barely 400 cycles, and his face still showed the shock that older Sethrani had learned to bury. The convoy has consolidated. 43 vessels remain operational. 17 more are running on emergency power. The medical ships are overwhelmed.
Casualties? 62,000 in the last rotation, mostly from the civilian transports that took hull damage during the retreat. 62,000. A number. Just a number. Kethris remembered when the hegemony had commanded 12 trillion souls across 900 worlds. She remembered when losing 62,000 would have been considered a minor incident, barely worthy of a council notation.
Now it was a wound that might kill them. "And the dissolution?" she asked, using the name they had given to the enemy. Not because they had chosen it, but because they had never learned what the enemy called itself. Communication had proven impossible, negotiation irrelevant. The dissolution did not conquer, it did not enslave, it simply erased. Worlds, stations, fleets, histories, everything it touched ceased to exist in any meaningful way.
No pursuit detected, Thyron said. But our sensor range is limited. If they're following at distance...
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to.
Where are we? Kethris asked.
The navigators believe we've entered a region designated in old survey records as the Orion Spur, specifically a stellar neighborhood surrounding a yellow dwarf star catalogued as Sol.
Kethris frowned. I don't recognize the name. There wouldn't be reason to, Archon. The records indicate this region was surveyed approximately 3,000 years ago by automated probes. It was flagged as containing primitive life on the 3rd planet, pre-spaceflight, pre-industrial. The survey recommended no contact and no colonization due to resource scarcity in the system.
Pre-industrial, Kethris repeated. 3,000 years ago.
Yes, Archon.
She turned from the viewport for the first time, studying Fyron's face. And now? The young sentinel's expression flickered with something she couldn't quite identify. Our long-range sensors are detecting activity, significant activity. There appears to be an extensive presence throughout this system. Stations, vessels, communication traffic.
Hostile?
Unknown. But we've received no challenges, no warnings. Only.
Only what?
Only what appears to be a general navigation beacon, broadcasting in multiple frequencies, including several we don't recognize. The translation matrices are still processing, but the core message seems to be a greeting and an offer of assistance to any vessel in distress.
Kethris stared at him. An open offer of assistance? To anyone? Yes, Archon. That's either extraordinary hospitality or an exceptionally sophisticated trap.
Thyron nodded slowly. The Council is divided. Several members believe we should bypass this system entirely and continue to the galactic rim. Others argue that we need supplies, repairs, medical care, things we cannot provide for ourselves. They suggest attempting contact.
And what do the strategists recommend?
For a long moment, Thyron was silent. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The strategists are dead, Archon. They were aboard the Eternal Vigilance when it fell at Threshold Station. All of them. We have no one left who can provide tactical analysis.
Kethris closed her eyes. The Eternal Vigilance had carried the heart of the hegemony's military command. 14 high strategists, each one with centuries of experience. Gone, like everything else.
Then we make a decision with what we have, she said quietly. Bring the convoy to a halt at the edge of this system's detection range. I will take a small delegation forward in a diplomatic shuttle. If it is a trap, we lose only a few. If it is genuine... She trailed off, unwilling to give voice to the desperate hope that clawed at her chest.
Archon, you cannot.
I can, Sentinel, and I will. The hegemony that was would have sent ambassadors, subordinates, functionaries. But that hegemony is ash. What remains is 43 vessels of refugees with no home, no resources, and no future. She met his eyes, letting him see the exhaustion she usually kept hidden. If anyone is to beg for help from primitives, it should be the one who failed to prevent our destruction. The diplomatic shuttle was designed to impress. Its hull was adorned with ceremonial patterns that had represented Sethrani authority for millennia. Its interior featured anti-gravity fields, climate optimization, and sensory environments calibrated for maximum psychological impact on lesser species.
None of it mattered now.
Kethris sat alone in the delegation chamber, watching the yellow star grow larger through the main viewport. She had brought only 3 others, 2 guards and a communications specialist, all of them volunteers who understood they might not return. The rest of the shuttle's capacity remained empty, a reminder of how few Sethrani remained to fill such roles. Archon, the communications specialist, called from his station. We're being hailed.
Put it through.
The holographic display flickered, resolved, and showed her a face she had never expected to see. The creature was bipedal, symmetrical, with bilateral features arranged around a central axis. 2 eyes positioned forward like a predator's, a mouth designed for omnivorous consumption, skin ranging in tone from pale cream to deep brown. The specific individual addressing her was female, she thought, based on secondary physical characteristics, with dark hair pulled back from her face and calm, steady eyes that met Kethris's gaze without flinching. This was a human. This was a member of the species the old surveys had dismissed as primitive primates barely capable of stone tools. Unidentified vessel, this is Outer Rim Station 7. I'm Commander Sarah Chen. We've detected you on approach and noticed you're transmitting on diplomatic frequencies. Please identify yourself and state your purpose." The language was unfamiliar, but the translation matrices handled it smoothly. Kethris noted with surprise that the human communication systems were sophisticated enough to interface with Sethrani technology. That shouldn't have been possible. The probe surveys had recorded primitives hunting with sharpened sticks. "I am Archon Kethris Vorn of the Sethrani hegemony," she said, and heard the words rendered into the human tongue in real time. "My people are refugees. We have fled a catastrophic conflict in our home territories. We seek assistance." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She had never begged for anything in 9 centuries of life. Commander Chen's expression did not change. Her eyes moved slightly, as if reading information from a display outside the visual frame. "The Sethrani hegemony. We have records of your survey probes entering our system approximately 3,000 years ago. You marked us as, what was the term?" A pause. "Primitive and irrelevant, I believe." Kethris felt heat rise to her face. "Survey classifications are updated over time." "Clearly." Commander Chen's tone was neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or satisfaction, quickly suppressed. "You mentioned your refugees. How many vessels? How many individuals?" 43 vessels remain in our convoy. Approximately 2.3 million survivors. 2.3 million survivors? Out of how many originally? The question struck Kethris like a blow. She had not expected directness. She had expected posturing, negotiation, perhaps veiled threats. But this human simply asked, as if the answer mattered. 12 trillion, Kethris whispered, across 900 worlds. The silence stretched. Commander Chen's face remained controlled, but something shifted in her eyes, a deepening, a flicker of something that might have been recognition. "I see," she said finally. "Archon Vorn, I'm transmitting coordinates for a docking approach. We can provide temporary harbor for your delegation shuttle while we discuss the situation. I should warn you that decisions about larger-scale assistance will require consultation with authorities I'm not able to speak for, but you'll have safe harbor and we can talk." "That is generous." "It's basic decency," Commander Chen said. "We'll see you in 3 hours." The holographic display blinked out. Kethris stared at the empty space where the human's face had been. Basic decency, as if there were nothing exceptional about offering shelter to strangers from a civilization that had once dismissed your entire species as irrelevant. She thought about the Sethrani first contact protocols, the complicated rituals of dominance and submission, the careful calibrations of status and respect that could take years to negotiate. She thought about the dozens of species the hegemony had subjugated or absorbed, never once offering basic decency to those they considered beneath them. Perhaps there was a lesson in that. Outer Rim Station 7 was not impressive. This was the first thing Kethris noticed as the shuttle approached. The station was functional, well-maintained, efficiently designed, but it lacked the grandeur she had expected from a species capable of such rapid advancement. There were no towering spires, no ceremonial patterns, no visible displays of power or wealth. Just clean lines, practical structures, and the quiet efficiency of people who had better things to do than impress visitors. The landing bay was similar. Orderly, clean, functional. Workers in simple uniforms moved with purpose, guiding the shuttle to its berth with practiced ease. Commander Chen was waiting when Kethris descended the ramp, flanked by 2 officers who stood at relaxed attention. The human commander was smaller than Kethris. Most humans were, she now realized, but there was nothing small about her presence. She stood like someone who had earned her position through competence rather than inheritance.
Archon Vorn. Chen extended her hand, a gesture Kethris recognized from cultural databases as a greeting ritual. Welcome to Station 7.
Kethris took the offered hand, noting the firm grip, the calluses on Chen's palm. Thank you for receiving us. Let me introduce Captain Marcus Webb and Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka. They'll be coordinating with your people on logistics and medical needs while we talk.
The other humans nodded in greeting. Simple gestures, nothing elaborate. Kethris's guards shifted uncertainly, unsure how to respond to such informality.
If you'll follow me, Chen continued, I've arranged for us to speak privately. Your guards are welcome to wait in the adjacent room, or they can tour the station if they prefer. I assure you, you're in no danger here.
Kethris hesitated. Every instinct bred into her through centuries of political survival screamed that this was a trap, that such openness could only be a mask for something sinister. But she was too tired to resist and too desperate to refuse.
I will speak with you alone, she said. They walked through corridors that hummed with quiet activity. Humans passed them without staring. A few curious glances, nothing more. Workers, technicians, soldiers perhaps, all of them carrying themselves with the same understated confidence Kethris had observed in Commander Chen.
Your station is efficient, she offered. We try, Chen smiled slightly. I'm guessing it's not what you expected.
Nothing was enough. Nothing will ever be enough. The dissolution cannot be stopped. It can only be fled. Kethris met Chen's eyes, surprised to find something other than pity there, something harder. That is why I am here, Commander. Not to form alliances, not to seek military assistance, simply to warn you. This threat will eventually reach your space. Perhaps not for centuries, perhaps not for millennia, but it will come. And when it does, you should run. Don't fight.
Don't try to reason with it. Just run and keep running, and hope that the universe is large enough to hide in.
Chen was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable.
You came all this way to tell us to run? I came to beg for supplies and medical care for my people. The warning is a courtesy, the only thing I have left to offer.
What about helping us fight?
Kethris stared at her. Did you not hear what I said? There is no fighting. There is only dissolution.
I heard you. Chen leaned forward slightly. I heard that you fought for 12 years, that you made stands, developed strategies, tried everything you could think of. I heard that you lost, badly, catastrophically. But I didn't hear anything that suggests you know why you lost.
Kethris felt a surge of something that might have been anger if she'd had the energy for it. We lost because they are incomprehensible, because they cannot be damaged, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be understood.
You lost because you were alone.
The words hung in the air between them. You were alone, Chen repeated, her voice soft but unyielding. 900 worlds, 12 trillion people, millennia of civilization, and you faced this threat by yourselves? No allies? No coalition? Just the Sothrani hegemony, fighting alone against something that was bigger than you?
Kethris felt the color drain from her face. We had subject species.
Subjects, not allies, not partners, not friends.
Chen shook her head slowly. Did any of them stand with you when the cradle worlds fell? The silence was answer enough.
There's a reason we built this station at the outer rim of our territory, Chen said. A reason we broadcast that offer of assistance to anyone in distress. It's not because we're naive or generous or stupid. It's because we learned something a long time ago, back when we were still killing each other over patches of dirt on a single planet. What did you learn?
Chen's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Kethris saw something beneath the calm, something old and hard and forged in fire.
That no one survives alone.
The days that followed blurred together.
Kethris remained on Station 7 while human medical teams were dispatched to the refugee convoy. She watched through viewport windows as small, efficient vessels moved between her people's damaged ships, delivering supplies, transferring wounded, coordinating repairs. The humans worked with quiet competence, never grandstanding, never demanding gratitude.
She spoke with Commander Chen several more times and with other human officials who arrived to assess the situation. They asked detailed questions about the dissolution, its observed behavior, its apparent capabilities, the tactics the Sethrani had attempted. They listened carefully, took notes, and asked follow-up questions that revealed an uncomfortable truth. Humans thought differently than Sethrani.
Where the hegemony had approached the dissolution as a strategic problem to be solved through superior force, humans approached it as a puzzle to be understood through analysis and adaptation. They wanted to know about failures as much as successes, about anomalies and edge cases that the Sethrani military had dismissed as irrelevant.
Did you ever attempt communication in non-technological forms? A young human researcher asked her during one interview. Chemical signaling, gravitational manipulation, subatomic particle exchange?
No. We assumed they would respond to standard communication methods. You assumed they perceived reality the way you do. Kethris had no response to that. A week after her arrival, she was invited to a meeting that Commander Chen described only as significant. She found herself in a larger conference room, seated among a dozen humans representing, she was told, various branches of something called the Terran Collective. The woman who led the meeting was older than Chen, with gray hair and steady hands, and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of command. Admiral Lisa Park, her name was. She looked at Kethris with the same evaluating calm that seemed standard among humans. Archon Vorn, we've reviewed the data your people provided about the dissolution. We've also conducted long-range scans of the region you fled from. Admiral Park paused, her expression unreadable. Based on trajectory analysis, the dissolution is moving toward this sector. Estimated arrival at the edge of Terran space, approximately 2 years.
The words hit Kethris like a physical blow. 2 years? That quickly?
They seem to be accelerating, perhaps because resistance has ended in your former territories.
Then you must begin evacuations. Move your population to the galactic rim as far as possible.
No. The word was spoken quietly, but it stopped Kethris mid-sentence.
Admiral Park leaned forward, and for the first time, Kethris saw something fierce beneath the human's calm exterior. You came here expecting to find primitives, Park said. You expected us to cower, to flee, to follow your example of desperation. And I understand why. You've seen something terrible, something that broke a civilization that had endured for 40,000 years. But we are not the Sethrani hegemony, Archon Vorn. We don't break easily. You don't understand what you're facing.
We understand perfectly. You've provided extensive data, and we've analyzed it thoroughly. The dissolution is a threat unlike anything we've encountered. It may be unlike anything this galaxy has ever encountered, but that doesn't mean we're going to run.
Admiral, with respect, I have watched worlds die. I have seen fleets that took centuries to build vanish in moments. This is not a battle you can win.
Admiral Park smiled, and the expression sent a chill down Kethras's spine.
The Sethrani hegemony was a dominant power that had never faced a true existential threat, Park said. You expanded for millennia, absorbed species that couldn't resist you, and built your civilization on the assumption that you were the pinnacle of evolution. When something finally came along that challenged that assumption, you didn't know how to respond.
And humans are different?
We are. Park's eyes were distant for a moment, seeing something far away. We spent our entire history facing existential threats. From nature, from disease, from each other. We nearly destroyed ourselves 12 times before we ever reached space. We survived ice ages and pandemics and wars that killed hundreds of millions. We looked up at the stars and saw not opportunity, but challenge. Not a universe waiting to embrace us, but one waiting to kill us.
She leaned back in her chair, and her voice softened.
That's why we never stopped preparing. That's why we built not just outward, but deep. That's why we made allies instead of subjects, and partnerships instead of conquests. Because we always knew, in our bones, that something would eventually come for us. Something we couldn't face alone.
The dissolution
Is coming, and we're not going to run. We're going to fight.
Kethris stared at her, unable to find words. The calm certainty in Admiral Park's voice was terrifying, not because it seemed delusional, but because it didn't. The woman believed what she was saying, and worse, she had clearly built her entire civilization around that belief.
You'll die, Kethris whispered. All of you, every world, every station, every ship. You'll be erased, just like we were.
Admiral Park nodded slowly. Maybe. But if we are, we'll make them work for it. And if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that something we do here buys time for someone else, somewhere else, then it will have been worth it. She stood, and the other humans in the room stood with her.
Archon Vorn, you're welcome to remain here as our guest. Your people will continue to receive assistance for as long as we're able to provide it. But I want you to understand something. Park met her eyes, and there was no pride in her gaze, only resolve. We're not doing this because we think we're superior. We're doing this because it's what we do. It's what we've always done. When something threatens the existence of everything we love, we don't run. We stand, and we fight.
Until we can't fight anymore. Why? Kethris asked, her voice breaking. Why would you throw away your lives for a battle you cannot win?
Admiral Park smiled sadly. Because someone has to try. Because the universe is full of species who built great civilizations on the assumption that they'd never have to face their own destruction. And when destruction came, they had nothing left. No will to fight. No belief in anything beyond their own survival. We don't have that luxury. We never did.
She turned toward the door, then paused. Stay and watch, Archon Vorn. Whatever happens next, someone should survive to remember.
The months that followed changed everything Kethris thought she knew about humanity.
She watched as the Terran collective mobilized, not with the frantic desperation she had seen in the final days of the hegemony, but with terrifying calm. Messages went out across human space, and responses came back not as pleas for rescue, but as offers of assistance. Colony worlds volunteered their industrial capacity. Research stations shared data without restriction.
Military forces that had been dispersed across dozens of systems began converging with a coordination that seemed almost choreographed.
How, Kethris asked Commander Chen during one of their regular meetings, how do you do this without central command, without hierarchy forcing compliance? Chen smiled slightly. We have central command. We have hierarchy. What we don't have is the assumption that those at the top know everything and everyone else should just follow orders. She gestured toward the viewport, where human vessels moved in precise formation. Every ship captain out there has the authority to make decisions. Every crew has the training to adapt. We trust each other to do what needs to be done because we've spent centuries building that trust.
But the chaos.
There's no chaos. There's flexibility. There's adaptation. When you give people the information they need and the freedom to act, you'd be amazed at what they can accomplish. Kethris thought about the hegemony's command structure, the layers of authority, the rigid protocols, the punishment for independent action. She thought about how long it had taken for information about the dissolution to reach the central command, and how much longer it had taken for orders to filter back down to the front lines. She thought about the billions who had died, waiting for permission to act. A year passed. Then another. The dissolution was detected at the edge of Terran space on a morning that felt no different from any other. Kethris was on the observation deck when the alert came through, a calm voice announcing what she had dreaded for so long. All personnel be advised. Hostile contact confirmed at the Sigma Corvi boundary. The dissolution has entered Terran space. Around her, humans continued their work with barely a pause. A few looked up, nodded to each other, and returned to their stations. There was no panic, no chaos, just a subtle shift in the station's rhythm, like a heartbeat steadying before exertion. Kethris watched the tactical display as the first human fleet engaged the dissolution. It was a small force, nothing like the armadas the hegemony had assembled, but they fought differently. Instead of forming battle lines and projecting overwhelming force, they scattered, regrouped, and struck from unexpected angles. When one vessel was destroyed, the others adapted instantly, filling gaps, adjusting tactics. It wasn't enough. The dissolution continued to advance, consuming everything in its path. But for the first time, Kethris saw something she had never witnessed in 12 years of war. The dissolution hesitated. It was subtle, a pause in its advance, a flicker of uncertainty in its previously relentless movement. The humans had done something the Sethrani never had. They had made the enemy think. Days became weeks. The first fleet fell, then the second, but each battle revealed new information, new patterns, new possibilities. Human scientists worked around the clock, analyzing every fragment of data. Human commanders adapted their strategies based on what each sacrifice had taught them. And then, something unprecedented happened. A human weapon, a prototype, Kethris later learned, developed in secret over decades, actually damaged the dissolution. Not destroyed, not stopped, but damaged. A wound in something that had seemed invulnerable. The dissolution responded by accelerating its advance, consuming 3 colony worlds in a single week. But the damage had been done, not to its physical form, but to the assumption of its invincibility. For the first time, every species watching knew that this enemy could be hurt. The final battle began on a day that Kethris would remember for the rest of her long life.
She stood on the bridge of a human dreadnought, the Unconquered. Admiral Park had named it with dark humor, watching as the largest fleet she had ever seen assembled in the void. Human vessels by the thousands, yes, but also ships from a dozen other species. refugees from worlds the dissolution had consumed, allies humanity had cultivated over centuries. Even Sethrani survivors, their ancient pride finally broken enough to accept help.
They came, Kethris whispered. Admiral Park stood beside her, older now, tired, but still radiating that terrible calm. They always do. When it matters, when it truly matters, they always do. Why? Because we asked, because we helped them when they needed it, because we showed them that we could be trusted. Park's eyes moved across the tactical display, taking in the impossible scope of the assembled force. And because they know that if we fall, they're next. Self-interest and altruism aren't opposites, Archon. They're complementary. The dissolution appeared on the sensors, not as a single entity, but as a spreading stain of wrongness across the fabric of space. It had grown since Kethris had last seen it, fed by the worlds it had consumed. It was larger than anything she had ever witnessed, larger than the imagination could comfortably hold. And yet, looking at the fleet arrayed against it, the product of centuries of preparation, of alliances built on trust instead of conquest, of a species that had never stopped expecting disaster, Kethris felt something she had forgotten was possible. Hope.
All forces, Admiral Park said, her voice steady. This is Admiral Park. The enemy before us believes it has already won. It has destroyed civilizations older than its own existence. It has consumed worlds beyond counting. It has never known defeat.
She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried across every ship, every station, every listening ear.
Today, we teach it.
The fleet surged forward.
Kethris had thought she understood war. She had commanded fleets, directed campaigns, watched worlds burn. But she had never seen anything like what the humans called a coordinated assault.
The human ships didn't fight as individuals or even as squadrons. They fought as a single organism, a vast, distributed consciousness that adapted to every threat, exploited every weakness, and never, ever stopped pressing forward. When one section of the fleet was destroyed, others flowed to fill the gap without missing a beat. When the dissolution deployed new tactics, human commanders adjusted within seconds.
And they weren't alone.
The Margoth remnants struck from the left flank with weapons their ancestors had never shared with the hegemony. The Sistran survivors, thought extinct for centuries, emerged from hiding to attack the dissolution's rear. Species that had been enemies for generations fought side by side, their grudges forgotten in the face of extinction.
Humanity had not just built a fleet, it had built a coalition, a community, a family of species united not by conquest, but by choice. The battle raged for hours, then days. Vessels were destroyed by the thousands, and for every ship that fell, another took its place. The dissolution fought back with all the terrible power that had laid waste to 900 worlds.
But it wasn't enough. Slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn.
The weapons humanity had developed, refined through 2 years of desperate research, tested in sacrifice after sacrifice, began to take their toll. The dissolution could not be killed, the scientists had learned, but it could be contained, forced back, trapped in pockets of twisted space from which even its terrible power could not escape. Piece by piece, section by section, the humans and their allies tore the enemy apart.
When it ended, Kethris found herself weeping. Not from grief. She had shed all those tears long ago. These were different. These were the tears of someone who had forgotten that hope could survive the death of everything she loved.
Admiral Park found her on the observation deck, staring at the space where the dissolution had been. A wound in reality still lingered there, a reminder of what they had faced, but it was contained now, sealed behind barriers that would hold for millennia.
"It's over," Kethris said softly.
No. Park stood beside her, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes still clear. It's not over. It will never be over. There will be other threats, other enemies, other moments when everything seems lost. She smiled, and for the first time, Kethris saw warmth in the expression. But that's why we keep building, keep preparing, keep making friends.
"I don't understand you," Kethris admitted. "I don't understand how you can face certain death with such calm, how you can give so much to strangers, how you can—" she struggled for words, "how you can hope when hope should be impossible."
Park was quiet for a long moment.
3,000 years ago, she said finally, your probes found us hunting with stone tools. You looked at us and saw primitives, animals, something too insignificant to matter.
We were wrong. Yes, but not in the way you think. Park turned to face her, and Kethris saw something ancient in her eyes, something that had been forged in countless generations of struggle. You thought we were weak because we were young, because we hadn't built great cities or conquered the stars. But we weren't weak. We were learning. Every disaster, every war, every plague that should have destroyed us, we survived. And more than that, we learned. We learned that survival alone isn't enough.
That greatness isn't measured in what you conquer, but in what you're willing to sacrifice for others.
Your species taught yourselves that.
We taught ourselves. We failed countless times. We nearly destroyed ourselves over and over again. But we never stopped trying to be better. Park's voice softened. That's what made us different, Archon. Not technology, not strategy, just stubbornness. The refusal to give up, even when giving up was the logical choice. Kethris thought about the hegemony, about all the times logic had dictated surrender, and all the times the Sethrani had complied. She thought about the neat, orderly collapse of a civilization that had never been tested, never been tempered, never learned to bend without breaking.
You thought the war was over, she said quietly, after the dissolution consumed the cradle worlds. You thought we had lost and resistance was futile.
Admiral Park nodded.
But humanity disagreed.
We always do. Park smiled, and this time there was no darkness in it, only pride, well-earned and deeply held. Every time something tells us to accept defeat, we disagree. Every time the universe says we're too small, too young, too insignificant, we disagree. It's who we are. It's all we know how to be.
She placed a hand on Kethris's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended species.
The war isn't over, Archon. It won't ever be over. There will always be something out there that wants to destroy what we've built. But as long as there are beings willing to stand against the darkness, willing to hope when hope seems foolish, the darkness can never truly win.
Years later, Kethris would write her memoirs. She would tell the story of the hegemony's fall and humanity's rise. She would describe the battle in detail, the tactics and sacrifices and moments of impossible courage. But the part that readers remembered most was the final chapter.
In it, she described standing on the observation deck of a rebuilt station, watching human children play in zero gravity while their parents laughed and called after them. She described the memorial they had built for the fallen, Sethrani and human and a dozen other species, all honored equally. She described the quiet certainty she had finally come to understand, that the measure of a species was not in how long it endured, but in what it was willing to endure for.
The final line read, "I once believed that the stars did not care. I was wrong. The stars care because we make them care, because we insist against all evidence that life and love and hope matter in a universe that seems determined to prove otherwise. The dissolution thought the war was over when it consumed the cradle worlds. Humanity disagreed.
And in that disagreement, they taught me something my people had forgotten in 40,000 years of dominance. That the smallest flame, held steady against the darkest night, can become a fire that lights the galaxy."
They thought the war was over.
But as long as humanity exists, as long as any species exists that refuses to surrender, the war will never be over. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be.